is Max. It was George Miller who gave birth to a certain kind of car chase road movie. Now he's come back to reignite his world, which he started.
It really is a reimagination, and you can enter it and experience something spectacular.
This whole world is so detailed, and his characters are fascinating.
I live, I die, I live again!
George is such a legend of cinema, and I loved stepping into George's world for 6 months.
About 12 years ago, I was on a long flight between Los Angeles and Sydney, and the movie Fury Road came unbidden and played in my head.
Here we go!
And by the time I landed, I told my colleagues, I think I've got another Mad Max movie. It was an opportunity to use the new technologies and yet still do real people and vehicles in chaos.
Dramatizing a story that's in constant movement is very, very tricky. But to George, it's what he thrives in.
Remember to drive, yeah?
George is an absolute genius. And he just puts his heart and soul into every detail.
I've been working with George for about 35 years, and I've never seen George back away from what he has to do. He never takes the easy way through.
Reaching up and
George will ask you to do things which may seem insane, and then they will turn into something really wonderful. He flipped trucks and he blew things up and he attached people, including me, to things which were far too high. He did that for 6 months until he got everything he wanted.
George kind of created a world that will satisfy his fans, but also a generation who might not know those movies.
Fury Road is a more immersive version than those films. You're going to see something even larger in terms of the authenticity of the world.
George has spent a lot of time working out everything in the Mad Max world. I think people are going to go berserk when they actually get a full glimpse of the rest of the thing.
You're not really in a movie. You're in George's head.
I told George in the green room after I saw Mad Max for the first time, a friend of mine and I, we looked at each other and we said, just shut it down. Movies are done. We did it. It's over after Mad Max. It's the best movie ever made. Congratulations, George.
Thank you.
I have no qualms saying that. I want to talk about, in this trailer that we just saw, you say that you were on a flight and you came up with the idea for Mad Max. You visualized the movie in your head. Now, it took 10, 12 years since that flight to get the movie made, right?
Yes, you know, you always have ideas in your head. You're playing stories in your head, and it's difficult to get for all the planets to align to make this movie. But there's always a kind of gravitational pull towards a story, and for some reason we just couldn't kill this movie with a stick. It just kept on popping up. It was greenlit 3 times, 3 different studios. It would fall down, we'd make another movie, a Happy Feet, and then it'd get up again, and eventually we got it made. But I don't think, if the story wasn't so compelling, to me at least, I don't think it would have got made because you would have run out of steam. So I'm glad we got it up there on the screen.
Now, after 12, 13 years, how did the story change over the course of time? Because one of the things that I love about the film is while on the surface it seems so crazy and random and all these ideas coming at you, it's actually densely packed with imaginative ideas that are very much related to this world and make sense, and you can kind of always explain them when people ask you about them. So how often over the course of these years were you sort of like, oh, okay, well, the war boys are like this, and the wives are like this, and this is how the world makes sense in this way?
Well, it's interesting because with a movie like Fury Road, you're really going forward to the past, even though it's a dystopian future. you're basically going back to a much more elemental time, like almost neo-medieval. And there you find the same kind of patterns of behavior that we have as human beings across history. There's always the tyrannical figure who tops the dominance hierarchy, who controls all the resources at the expense of the many. There's always people willing to die for a cause, many times manipulated by a powerful tyrant. These things happen over and over and over again in history. That doesn't say we don't change. It's just saying that the same kind of structures. We are, after all human beings, and the same patterns emerge one way or another. So in a way, these movies are kind of allegories, a little bit like the American Western. It's like they're simple morality tales told in a very spare landscape, and Mad Max is part of that tradition. One of the things we like to do is put a lot of stuff, what I like to call a lot of iceberg under the tip. So even though the film on the surface is one long extended chase, there's a lot of stuff happening underneath, and it's there for people to pick up or not. In many ways, it's a little bit like poetry or music. It's in many ways in the eyes of the beholder. You're there to take whatever experience according to your own worldview. At least that's a theory.
Now, not to belabor this too much, but going back to this moment where you saw the film in your head for the first time, do you remember what the central idea was? Did you have that sort of allegorical idea of what Fury Road would entail at that point, or was that something that you developed over the course of time? What was the first sort of part of Fury Road that you saw?
Well, the very first idea was very simple. Because I love the kinetics of chase movies, I wanted to see what it'd be like to do an extended chase. And we pick up the story on the run. We pick up the characters, we pick up who they are, their backstory, their relationship, the world as we're moving. We don't stop to explain it. There was that, and the idea that the MacGuffin that people were in conflict over was to be human. In this case, the 5 wives, breeding stock, as the Immortan thinks of them, escaping the warlord. And out of that, there had to be a warrior, a road warrior. Couldn't be male, because that's a different story, a man stealing wives from another man. So it had to be female, hence Furiosa. And then Max, who's like a caged animal, gets swept up into that experience. That was the essential idea. And that sort of wouldn't go away. I kept on pushing it away, but the story kept coming back to me over and over again till it developed into a fully fledged thing, and I got really excited about.
Max kind of in this film has a similar arc to the Road Warrior, correct? Where it sort of finds his own morality by sort of helping a group of people that need a bit of his help. When you come up with the wives and you come up with Imperator Furiosa, which is just an iconic character at this point. I think everybody just likes saying that name. When you come up with this, did you have any idea that, like, upon release, people were going to start talking about this character and this storyline the way they have, as a sort of like one of the first feminist action heroes of a Hollywood film, and something that represents something even greater in terms of the progression of Hollywood and storytelling?
You hope people get what you're trying to do, but I didn't expect it to be received that well, the movie at large, and Furiosa's character, Charlize's character. I knew she was, while we were shooting it, that she was strong, but it was all part. She was a character in the story, and you don't know really what's going to stick. I mean, the guy, the Doof Warrior playing the guitar, seemed to catch on with people. For me, he was just he was just a natural, logical extension of the world.
That's what I mean. Like all these things, like you have a guy shooting a flamethrower out of a guitar while he's strapped to a Mack truck, and there's speakers behind him. And I've heard people ask this question to you so many times, like, where the hell did that come from, George? And you're like, well, I think, there'd be war drums, and this is the way that the world would work, and it's very practical and logical. How in the hell is that logical?
Well, it's logical. Everything in the film's pretty helter-skelter. So unless you have underpinning kind of logic, an internal logic that feels that we know where everything comes from, then there's a chance that people will buy into that world. And as we know, before amplified sound, there was always the music of war. The bugler, the drummer, the bagpipe player, and none of those would work in the Immortals world because there were always loud cars. And so why not a guitar and why not speakers? And everything had to be at least dual purpose, so it had to be a weapon, a flamethrower.
How often did you find yourself having to explain a lot of this stuff on set while you were in the midst of shooting? Or was all that explanation done in pre-production?
Oh, that's all done way ahead in pre-production. I mean, everyone who worked on the film, designing the film, had to dig down deep into the backstory and really have an understanding as much as possible. Not only the objects and the characters and their wardrobe and their vehicles, but even, in a sense, language. Everything was found objects repurposed. And that's why the language is even a little kind of corrupted, where characters like Nux talks about McFeasting with the heroes of all time. It's just kind of distorted a little bit because it's the world has not, there's no internet, there's no books, they're just these fragments that are left that people sort of repurpose.
Now, the film gives off a vibe that it might have been a kind of hellish shoot, like a really hard shoot, was it?
Yeah, it was, remote location in Southwest Africa. It was physically difficult because everything we shot was real cars and real people in a real desert. And there's if you're not careful, as fatigue sets in and you're not attentive, everybody, things could go really badly wrong. So that it was kind of an endurance test for everybody. But we knew that, and we knew that going in, and we just had a magnificent crew who just managed to every day not lose sight of what we're trying to do, keep everyone safe, be very, very, very prepared, and it's a logistical exercise that everyone has to, in a sense, be on the same page. Very difficult for the actors because there's not many moments where they could basically stop and play out a full scene because you'd call action and a few seconds later you're yelling cut. Right. So it's very hard for people to get their teeth into because it's a mosaic. It's like making a piece of visual music. It's taking each note, each little phrase musically and putting it together, mainly in the cut. But
to get all of those pieces for the cut is incredible. How many shots? Do you know how many shots are actually you got before going into the editing room?
Well, I'd say we lost very few scenes because each scene was hard won. I'd say there would be. Well, we had multiple cameras first of all, so not allowing for that. In the final movie, there are 2,800 shots. The way back when we did Road Warrior or Mad Max 2, there's 1,200. That was a fairly fast movie. So we're speed reading movies now. The thing about what was so difficult in cutting this movie is we used digital cameras, and we set up whole battle scenes, as it were, and had cameras everywhere. And being digital cameras, you would have a card which could capture 40 minutes at a time. And often you'd just let the camera run. And we ended up with 480 hours of footage. That's a lot of footage to get down to 2 hours. But a lot of that was just wasted because it was, while while the vehicles were just waiting for an explosion and so on. You could do that. You might only get a few seconds out of that 40 minutes. So we had to trawl through a lot. But to answer your question, I think I'd say there'd be close to 3,000 shots we had to do.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Now, with this film coming out this past year, we are in the midst of, I think, a superhero movie world. The world is just made up of superhero movies, it seems, especially coming out of Hollywood. I know you yourself were developing a superhero movie at one time in your career, but did you feel the need at all with Mad Max? I know that you had envisioned the film 12 years ago, but at this point, feeling a need to compete with those superhero movies in any way? I mean, I think it's way beyond, it's leagues beyond those movies, but was there any sort of pressure to compete visually or special effects-wise with those movies?
No, you're basically telling the story at hand. If you, you're just dealing with the job in front of you, and you're trying to sort of hold on to the important things in telling your story, or the film that you're all trying to make together. I think they're a different genre, and there's, I just knew that this was going to be different in the sense that, it was real vehicles in the real desert with real people. So we used a lot of CGI, but it was always in the interest. For instance, I used to watch movies in the old days, and you could tell how many takes they did when a car skidded because you could see the marks on the road, and now you can erase take 1, 2, and 3 and keep the final take. Back in the old days, if you used to watch those westerns where those stuntmen used to fight on the top of trains, and they were incredibly brave because they had no harnesses, so they had to really keep themselves grounded. They couldn't fight very freely, as it were. Well, in this movie, people were on harnesses, so they could be more fluid wilder in their actions and so on. So we ended up with our actors on the harnesses doing a lot of the stunts because they could be safe, and we had very physical actors. I mean, Tom had been a rugby player, Charlize had been an accomplished ballet dancer, Nick is very, very skillful and strong. And so on, right through our cast.
Now, in telling a kinetic story like this, you leave out a lot of the backstory. A lot of the backstory is left out, and it's not a very expository movie at all. You're not there's a couple moments where things slow down and you hear a little bit, but they don't slow down the way that most, I think, action movies do, where everything stops and someone says, well, this is the bad guy, and this is where they're from, and this is where I'm going, and this is what my objective is. And they consistently do that as the plot unfolds. Did you ever feel any pressure? Was there did the studio just know what you were doing right away and just sort of let you go? Because that's pretty incredible on the studio's part to be like, yes, make this radical action movie. Here you go.
Well, we were able to explain what we were trying to do. It's a very simple story. It's really the subtext where all this detail's coming through. If we were to go out into any environment and meet a group of people, you don't know everyone's backstory. But if someone, for instance, Furiosa has lost an arm. Now, there's no time for recreational talk. They can't sit down and talk about how'd you lose your arm? It's much more, there's no time for that talk. But you know that she's a warrior. You know she's been through something. So so we knew that was part of the exercise.
You also get the sense that in this world, people could just not have arms. Like, a lot of people could just not have arms and no one would ask a question.
No one would ask the question.
They would just assume, you got your arm cut off at some point.
Yeah, so, and that's, you see that in the world. You see that in the world. People, there's physical damage and internal damage, psychological damage to everybody. And and you carry it on the surface, and you can observe it or not. But there had to be enough, you know. I read something once where Alfred Hitchcock said, "I try to make movies where they don't have to read the subtitles in Japan." And he's basically talking about movies which are very visual and basically use the syntax of cinema, the film language, to tell a story. And you can almost watch Fury Road as a silent movie and pick up most of what was happening. Yeah. So that's the exercise.
I think that could also be misinterpreted too, to be like I'm making movies that have no substance or something, and I'm so that the international audiences can pick them up. But Mad Max Fury Road, in terms of visual poetry or in terms of a silent film, has a lot of substance within that because of all of the sort of imaginative ideas that go into this world and are related to this sort of dystopian, broken down world that, as you said, flash back to the past a little bit.
Yes, that's the most gratifying thing about the movie, that people have picked up on that, because there's a risk that it is only read on the surface, but you know, as people talk about the movie, as people write about the movie, that's the thing that's coming through in many ways more than I even hoped for, and that's a big deal to me. So as I say, there's got to be a lot below decks in any story, so. Yeah, that makes me really happy, because you're never sure if it's there or if it's going to be read.
Do you consider the film political at all? I think some people would hear me ask that and be like, you're talking about Mad Max Fury Road, but in many ways, what I loved so much about it was that deep underneath, it felt like all the references to history felt like they had a political subtext, or at least a knowledge of the politics of these environments.
I think every story, in some ways, political, particularly if it's about history, and looking at what human behaviours tend to be repeated throughout time in various incarnations. There's always the tyrannical figure, as I said, usually in some protected place like a citadel, controlling the resources. It's always been through history. If you go to all the great citadels around the world, or the great fortresses, they all have the same kind of structure, protecting the more powerful. And what's really interesting, they develop in places, you know, like India, or the citadel at Salzburg, the palace in Kyoto, all around the world you'll see these places. And they never knew of each other. They never knew of each other, and yet they all have the same sort of architecture, basically. And we see that either metaphorically or in reality today. So there are constants, and those constants, of course, are political. I mean, as I say, people can reference that stuff according to their own experience and worldview. In many ways, everybody in this movie is a commodity. Yes. Even Max. Everybody wears the logo of the Immortan branded on their back. Furiosa, the War Boys, the wives, Max, everybody. And you know, it's not hard to see that in the modern world. It certainly was the case. You know, you go back to feudal times. The serfs were literally the commodity of the nobles. They were exchanged as if they were cattle or a wagon or a weapon. They were sold and bought exactly that way. And you could argue that that's happening in this world as we speak.
There's definitely an element, I mean, in regards to the imagery surrounding women as a commodity in the film. There's an argument to be made, as maybe blunt or a shell of an argument that this is that it's a world that's being destroyed by men who are gobbling up and owning these commodities, and the commodities that are women, what makes them a commodity are the things that also could nurture a world and grow for a better world, and at the end we have women sort of taking over, which is a sort of a parable for women should run the world.
Well, they can become tyrants as well. One of the
no,
big,
George, girls run the world.
No, Well, one of the great things you get out of stories, and this is particularly Joseph Campbell, is that yesterday's hero is today's tyrant. If they love what they built so much that they become holdfast and rigid, they hang on to it. So there have also been tyrannical women. But the story in this case is, for me, with Max and Furiosa, who basically are trying to kill each other at the beginning of the movie, it's only by regard of one for the other, and in a sense cooperating, even reluctantly, can they survive. So it's certainly not anti-male; it's anti-power, or the abuse of power. And we all know that it's very, very difficult to use power constructively or positively. It's very, very easy to use it destructively. So that's just all of history, all of storytelling tells us that. It's such a common motive that's repeated over and over again, and this is just, as I say, another version of it.
Brilliant directors, so practical about their genius. Yeah, it's just another version. We have a really special guest with us right now, starring in Mad Max. We have Nicholas Hoult, who is here to join us on stage with Mr. George Miller. Nicholas, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. Congratulations on being a part of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, such a pleasure to get to spend any amount of time, as you guys can tell from listening to him talk here now. Such a pleasure to get to spend any amount of time with this guy and be a part of his crazy imagination is a treat.
I want to ask, when going into shooting the movie, I know that he had thousands of pages of storyboards, so you can see that idea of the film there. You're shooting the movie. He's talking about how it's like a mosaic, and you're shooting 2 seconds, 3 seconds here. It must feel crazy. He's the director. He's got it in his head. You're trusting him. What did you think when you saw the first cut of the movie? Were you prepared for that? Was that exactly what he told you it was going to be, or did it shock you like it shocked the rest of us?
It was shocking. Yeah, no. I mean, the pace of it was, it was visceral, and then I mean, it was just crazy because a lot of the time on set we couldn't hear anything particularly well because the engine noise, and a lot of the time we wouldn't know where the cameras were. You'd be midway through a take and you'd look down and you'd see a camera was hidden in the footwell of your vehicle. You'd be like, well, damn, I didn't realize they'd been shooting me all this time because I couldn't see the main cameras that were floating around. So to see how it all came together, and I know you and your wife spent a long time in the edit creating the little nuances to it and making it so beautiful, basically, yeah.
That's right. Your wife is the editor of the film, right?
Yes, Margaret Sixel, yeah. And she didn't want to cut the film. She said, I don't...
She didn't want to?
Well, she didn't want to because she said, look, I don't really know much about action movies. I don't follow them. I mean, she knows a lot about movies. But that was precisely why. I knew two things, that she's got a kind of a super brain, and key to a movie like this is to have a very strong causal relationship between one shot and the next. In the same way that music, you talk to composers and there's always a connection between one chord and the next, the melodic line, and it's almost mathematical in that way. And she had that ability, plus she has a very low boredom threshold, so she hates repetition. I'll sit in a movie with her and she'll be shuffling and whatever. I said, what's wrong? She said, just they're repeating the same thing over and over again. And I don't see
Not a fan
it.
of Memento. She's not a Memento fan, is she?
Oh, no, well, Memento is a great movie, specifically because it's repetitive. But when you're just getting the same thing, and this film could have been that, a big danger of just action after action. There's a big risk there, and to some extent it might be still the case. But yeah, so... And also, she was able to see things that I couldn't, and wasn't afraid to say, no, we can't do that. But there are a lot of cameras, and you're right. It's a weird film to direct because quite often you talk about something, and then you just have to. I couldn't be there with you. I couldn't be in the vehicles, and even if we could talk, we had speakers sometimes, but you couldn't be heard. So you basically had to have a good sense of what the scene was doing, and then just do whatever you could, I guess.
Yeah, but George was always very clear before each take. He'd talk through what had been happening with your character up until that point, the objections, like everything that was going on. So you'd go into it, even though you were flying by the seat of your pants a little bit, you were still very clear in where you were and what was happening at that time and what the character was doing. And also, like, even before shooting started, hours of videos that you'd send through to us talking about the character and the backstories and everything. So I think that's what makes the film special. There's such depth underneath it all.
How did he describe your character to you? How did he describe your character to you off the bat initially? Because there's definitely a desperate tragedy to your character, but also a lot of humor. He's a very tragically funny, desperate guy.
The humor kind of came out a little bit along the road. A little bit. We kind of discovered that he was a bit like a puppy. You know, George always describes Max as being like a rabid dog that you don't know what he's going to do next, and Nux is much more of a puppy where he's very affectionate and committed to whatever he chooses to do at that time.
Nux is also a great puppy name, by the way. Now that I think of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
If I have a dog, I might name it Nux. That's a great name. So you're shooting the film, and along the way, you're starting to realize that there's a certain comedy to this character and a playfulness.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and all, I mean, I don't know. That was just something that kind of came about from it. And I think someone that keeps on failing, as heartbreaking as it is for him to watch someone keep on failing, it's kind of like the little squirrel thing in Ice Age that's trying to hide the nut. And just every time he gets close to hiding it, something goes wrong. And Nuts is kind of like that, you know. All he wants to do is go to Valhalla and appease Immortan Joe, and every time he gets close, something goes wrong that's not fully his fault. And that's from an outside perspective very funny, I think.
What was the most challenging part of shooting this movie for you?
Well, well, you know what? Actually, interestingly, I was backstage listening to you, and I'd completely kind of forgot, erased from my memory the dialogue. And how strange that was at first to get your tongue around, because you would read it and you wouldn't be aware of what. I mean, it kind of all made sense, but at the same time, it was nothing. It was almost like doing Shakespeare or something, where you're like, what is this? How does this come alive? So there was a lot of time we spent working on that, and I was actually listening to George. What George would send through voice notes, lots of evenings, saying like recapping what happened that day and talking about the next day's work. And I think throughout the process of the filming, I ended up with quite a lot of other characters' dialogue at points. And I've got voice notes from you just being like, evening, Nick, so tomorrow you'll be saying everybody's lines. Me sitting there, me being like freaking out before I realised you were joking.
We have a very special guest here who is presenting an award to George and to Nicholas for the film. We have Gray Drake from Rotten Tomatoes, who's coming with a very special award. Come on up here, Gray.
Say hello to my little friend. Now, from day to day, RottenTomatoes.com presents you with the films and television shows that our professionally approved critics say are fresh and rotten. But at the end of the year, we give away these guys. This is a Golden Tomato Award. Now, our editor-in-chief, Matt Atchity, and I are actually going to be back here on this stage on Friday presenting a full list of this year's winners. But to tell you how these things are won, this is no easy feat, okay? This is basically like getting to Valhalla to win one of these, okay?
Congratulations, Nick, you made it.
So how we determine the winners is that at the end of the year, films and TV shows are given an adjusted percentage score that's based on how many of our Rotten Tomatoes approved professional critics have given a film or TV show a positive review, and the number of reviews that film or TV show has gotten, right? So, with 333 reviews at 97% certified fresh, it is an honor to award George Miller and Nicholas Hoult and Mad Max Fury Road the Golden Tomato Award for Best Reviewed Wide Release of 2015.
All right.
You did it! Woo! Way to go! Fun fact, that thing is so heavy, you could easily murder any imperator with it.
it's really heavy actually, but we say tomato, don't we? We do. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, guys. I feel like that's not the only award you're going to be collecting in the upcoming weeks. Congratulations on that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Gray. I think we have some time for audience Q&A. First question.
My first question is for George. I just wanted to know what your technique is when you're shooting. Do you shoot in chronological order, or you just bounce in between the movie?
Well, it's always incredibly useful if you can shoot in chronological order, but it's never necessarily practical. Some stories allow you to do that, and in this case, we tried as much as possible to shoot the main body of the movie, not the beginning of the movie, the bookends at the Citadel, but we tried to shoot them, to shoot the main body chronologically. For good reason. The film happens pretty much in real time over 3 days, let's say, so it's a concentrated time. And then there's also attrition to the characters and the vehicle, so it's very hard to predict, if there's going to be a crash, exactly the damage you're going to do to, say, the war rig. So it's best to try to follow some chronological order. But because of location shifts and all these other logistical factors, you can't do it exactly. It's also very, very helpful to the actors, particularly if there's not a very, very clear script, if it's not evident in the screenplay, that you can actually sort of progress and find your character as you go. So if it's possible and it doesn't impact the budget or the schedule significantly, it's always best to shoot chronologically. I used to think when I was a kid, like a lot of people, that you would, you'd shoot everything chronologically, but it just doesn't make sense. If you're in a particular location, you want to stay there. You don't want to go and come back again and so on.
Next question.
Hello. So I have to say I'm having heart palpitations right now because I did not know you were coming next, so hello.
I should have warned you. I'm sorry.
So this is for Mr. Miller. If you had to write yourself into Mad Max, what kind of character do you see yourself being?
Repeat.
If you had to, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Oh, which character would if I was in Mad Max? Nick said a milker. It's an interesting question because in many ways, when you're directing, you or at least writing, you're really trying to put yourself into the space of every character. So in many ways, you sort of fall in love with your characters because of you get sort of an intimate knowledge. You're looking for what's positive in them and what's negative in them and so on. But if just on the surface, I mean, it'd be cool if I was Max, but I think I'm more like the Immortan. So I don't know, but probably you're right. I'd be a great milker.
You're not a tyrannical leader. He's very calm on set and cool, and when everybody else is flapping around and it's going crazy, he's still very peaceful and handles everything with grace. So he wouldn't become a tyrannical leader.
I never understand directors that can do that. It's handling that stuff with grace. It's got to be so difficult. You must want to yell and scream and flip out all the time.
Well, even if you want to, it would do no good.
Right.
So you very, very, very quickly learn that there's no point. You can do it, it might let off steam, but it's got nothing to do with the work. It's problem solving a lot of the time, and bad stuff happens. But if you dwell on that, it really just takes away so much. I'm just talking about how characters look or who I'd like to dress up as. If I was doing cosplay, I'm not talking about what's inside.
Next question.
Hey, Nick. I just wanted to say you're awesome as Beast, and looking forward to the next movie. And you're awesome in this movie too. And George, I love the visual style of this movie. I heard that there was might be a black and white version that might be coming out, or you wanted to put out. I was wondering if that's true and how you feel about that.
Yes, somehow it got out that we're going to release it, but we're not going to release it in the cinema. We're going to do a black and white version for another DVD. The big thing, I don't know what it is, but these movies, the best versions for me are in black and white. And way back when we did Road Warrior, accidentally I saw a black and white version because in those days the composers used to conduct the orchestra with what they called a slash tube, a cheap black and white, high contrast print of the movie, where they would screen it in front of the orchestra as they're watching and conducting. And when I saw that version, I thought the movie, for some reason that I can barely grasp, the movie looked more powerful. It looked way cooler. And I think because it pushed these kind of movies into a more elemental state. And we know ourselves, if we take a picture of ourselves on the smartphone and we turn it into black and white, quite often it just looks better, or it's more abstracted. And so we took some scenes from Fury Road and turned them into black and white, because you can do that now. And they just look cooler. I don't know why. I just think it's more abstracted. So I think we're going to be releasing that version. And I also wanted to do one where there's just music and just sound, and with the black and white. In other words, you take all the music out and see what's there, and then you take all the dialogue and everything out and just leave the music and see what's there, just to see how much story you get from each of those elements.
This isn't directly related to that, but it just reminded me, because you're talking about that similar thing, is we actually shot, strangely, I've never done it before or since, we shot day for night on this movie. So all the night scenes were actually shot during the day, which I didn't even realize was a possibility or a thing, but you picked that up from the old Westerns, right? That's what they used to do? Right. Yeah. So we got told off for squinting too much. You'd be like, well, yeah, it's bright sunshine. They'd be like, no, it's nighttime. Like,
bright sunshine in the Namibia desert.
Yeah.
Well, there's a very, very good reason for that. Yeah, first of all, it's very, very hard to light a huge landscape. But more importantly, in the old Westerns, they used to shoot day for night because horses didn't have headlights. And so there was no, if you like, artificial light. And in the case of the war rig, it was it couldn't have its lights on because people could see where it was. The marauders chasing them behind, they could have their lights on because they didn't care. So we shot those scenes at twilight, and all the scenes with the war rig, except where you saw the light of the oncoming vehicles, we shot them in daylight. And it looked weird, and as you say, if you saw that footage, it wouldn't look that interesting because it had to be flat in some way. It couldn't be very high contrast and so on. But it was appropriate. I think it would have looked a lot faker, a lot more fake, if it was shot, where will the lights come from? And as you know, if you're out there close to a full moon, it's surprising what you could see. I know I've been in places with a full moon with no artificial light and being able to read a book. So, and you can find your way around.
Well, I've got to let the two of you go, but I've got one last question before you go. I know that you're working on another Mad Max with Tom Hardy, or he's signed on to it. Is there anything that you can tell us about where Max is going to be, or where you are in the project, in the development of it?
Well, all I can say is that we're having conversations about it. If I start trying to, I find myself talking around it, and I get myself into trouble with spoilers and things like that. So all I can say is that that there are conversations about it. And
but you have a story in mind?
We've written, because we had so much backstory, and because when the films were delayed, we just dug deeper into the characters and the world, and without really trying, we ended up with two other stories, which are fairly complete. But when we'll get a chance to make them, I really can't. I really don't know at the moment. So it's there, but the these world and characters, they live in your head like imaginary friends, and they keep on popping up unbidden regardless. So they're there.
Well, I can't wait for the next one, but we have Fury Road for now, and I think that's pretty incredible. Congratulations. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.